No one is beyond the reach of God. Think of someone you know. God can still reach them. If God can reach an Alice Cooper, he can certainly reach your non-believing husband or your prodigal son or your daughter. Really, when you get down to it, Alice, being a pastor's son, was actually just a prodigal who returned to the Lord. He's just a modern version of the prodigal son. And, you know, and you'd think these people wouldn't be open to the gospel, but I think when someone has experienced almost everything the world has to offer, I think when you've been there and you've done that, you've bought the t-shirt, and in some cases you've been the t-shirt, you get to the top and you realize that nothing is there. These people are really searching.
Folks, welcome to the Eric Metaxas Show. It's the show about everything, including what I'm going to talk about now, which is a book written by a friend of mine, Pastor Greg Laurie. The title of the book is Lennon, as in John, Dylan, as in Bob, Alice, as in Cooper, and Jesus, as in my Lord and Savior. It's subtitled The Spiritual Biography of Rock and Roll. Greg Laurie, my friend, welcome back.
Eric, good to be with you, and I've decided I'm going to do this entire interview in a British accent, if you don't mind.
And how about in a Liverpudlian accent?
All right then, Eric, it's good to be with you. It's fab, it's gear, it's lovely, So I want to talk about these things with you and talk a bit like a Beatle.
And if you want to... That's it. If you want to listen to this album, we'll put it on an LP album vinyl. Okay, now come on.
New album's coming out.
Let me ask you first questions first. Can you tell I'm wearing a wig? Be honest. You're my friend.
If that's a wig, I'm ordering one today.
I use the finest wig adhesive. As you know, this is a horsehair wig. I invested in it. I said they hold their value. They hold their value. Okay. Listen, this book is exciting to me, Greg, and you've written many books. You're an evangelist. You're at Harvest Church in Orange County, but you write about the lives of people and their intersection with faith and Jesus. So this one, Lennon, Dylan, Alice, and Jesus, I just read a whole book talking about the spiritual Bob Dylan, the spiritual side of him, and it seems so clear that he still is a believer in Jesus. He doesn't talk about it the way he used to. But do you cover that in the book?
Yeah, I have a whole chapter on Bob, and that's exactly my premise. Is I've heard it said that will Dylan abandon his Christian faith and return to his Jewish roots? Well, he is Jewish, but he did not abandon his Christian faith. In fact, I just read a review of his recent concert. Dylan never stopped touring. He's on the road constantly. He's playing his song, God Has Served Somebody, from Slow Train Coming, which is an overt Christian song, and has another newer song that he's written that is very much a faith song. So, Bob came under such attack when he came out publicly as a Christian. I don't know if he just got tired of all the drama and controversy, but I don't see that he ever stopped believing what he was saying. Not that long ago, he did a Christmas record, of all things, a Bob Dylan Christmas record, and sang those old songs just as you would expect Bob Dylan to sing them. But at the same time, one interviewer said, "You sing those songs as though you believe them." He says, "I do." And, so I think Dylan is a work in progress, God's
not like us. We've got it all figured out. Let's be honest, you and me. No, it's so interesting because people. I mean, listen. It's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to you. People say things about you, and they get back to you, and you just go, "That is not true." I can tell you, I never said that, or I know that that's not true, and people have said confidently about Bob Dylan that he moved on, he's not a Christian, he went back to his... That is not true. The other book that I read, which is just a whole book on Dylan, I mean, it makes the case so clearly. So I'm thrilled that you have him in your book. Now, Alice Cooper, whom I've met, and I'm sure you have, he definitely is a Christian.
Yes, without question. So Alice... it surprises people, when you tell them that, because I've told people, I'm interviewing Alice Cooper. Didn't he bite the head off a bat? No, I think that was actually Ozzy Osbourne. But, these rock
we don't even know if Ozzy did it, but that's another story, right?
Very true. Yeah, there's But one thing Alice did do is a chicken was killed, but the rumor is he bit the head off a chicken and drank the blood. Actually, what happened was at one of his concerts, he told me this personally, someone threw a chicken on the stage. Alice looked at the chicken and thought, well, chickens fly, I'll throw it back into the crowd. He threw the chicken out. The chicken didn't fly, and the people tore the chicken apart and then threw what was left of it on the stage. So,
are you serious?
What can you do? This is rock and roll, Eric.
Alice Cooper's crowds are, they're a little rowdy. They literally tore the chicken apart. A live chicken, not a cooked chicken, not a rotisserie chicken, a live chicken.
But that was years ago. So Alice, probably around 30 years ago, was really strung out on drugs. I'm not laughing. I'm laughing at the whole chicken thing.
We're laughing.
He was really strung out on drugs. He was getting ready to literally overdose. He had a rock of cocaine the size of a softball. He was snorting it. His wife had left him. He says he looked in the mirror and saw blood coming out of his eyes, almost in the way he wears that makeup, as part of his act. And he said, I don't know if it was really happening or if I was hallucinating, but all I knew was I was going to die if I didn't stop. So he called out to God. He got clean. He got back with his wife. And he's been clean and sober for over 30 years and still performs as Alice Cooper. It's more of an act now. I mean, kind of a persona he takes on. But he speaks very openly and boldly about his faith in Christ. And that guy, man, he has more crazy stories to tell. But he's very firm in his faith. And so that's why he made the cover of the book.
Well, it is fascinating when you find out that these people. When I found out that Alice Cooper was a serious Christian, it was hard for me to believe at first.
Yeah.
But I actually one day I have a kind of I have a kind of a sixth sense that I can spot a celebrity like in the dark at 50 yards from the back of their head. It's weird. Yeah. And one day I was walking down Madison Avenue. It's got to be like 15 years ago, and there was a crush of a crowd, and just a millisecond, somebody passed me, kind of a wizened-looking face wearing a pork pie hat. And I said, Alice Cooper. And I shouted to him, and I had a short conversation with him, and I said, I heard you're a believer. And he said, yeah, my dad's a Lutheran pastor. But it was like this wonderful moment, in New York. Nobody else recognized him. But it for some reason, and it's why I'm glad you write these books, like the book you wrote about Johnny Cash, that these cultural icons, that some of them, and obviously Steve McQueen, these amazing people who aren't maybe known for their faith, are nonetheless very serious about their faith. And you've done the legwork and the research to tell us about that. I want to talk to you about all of them, but have to ask you about John Lennon. I'm never clear on John Lennon. What did you ferret out?
Yeah, well, John, he was raised as an Anglican. I don't know that it ever really took with him, but, his mother abandoned him. He was raised by his aunt, Mimi. His father abandoned him. So he kind of came out in his early years as an angry young man, very frustrated. And then, of course, was talented. He met Paul McCartney. Nitro met Glycerin. The explosion happened. The Beatles became a global phenomenon. John is best known for songs like Imagine, where he sings of imagining there's no heaven or hell. And he's also known for his famous statement, the Beatles were more popular than Jesus. Well, that is part of the story, but it's not all of the story. In fact, at one point in time, with many teenagers, especially in America, the Beatles were more popular than Jesus because a lot of us didn't know Jesus. And so it wasn't completely untrue what he was saying. But what happened is sometime in the late 70s, John was watching television there in New York City, where you are right now, at the Dakota, where he was living with Yoko. And he saw Billy Graham on television. And he called in and said he had committed his life to Christ. Now, there's a letter he allegedly wrote to Oral Roberts talking about how Christ had changed his life. We researched that. We were not able to find an authentic version of that letter, even a facsimile of it to speak of. So I mention it, but I don't use that as proof. We actually have an author who had access to John's diaries, where John himself wrote quite extensively about his faith in Jesus Christ, but it didn't last very long. He did record two.
We're gonna go to a break, but this is so fascinating, folks. We're talking to Pastor Greg Laurie. The book is Lennon, Dylan, Alice, and Jesus: A Spiritual Biography of Rock and Roll. Don't go away. Folks, welcome back. We're talking to my friend, Pastor Greg Laurie of Harvest Church in Southern California, the author of many books. The new one is called Lennon, Dylan, Alice, and Jesus: A Spiritual Biography of Rock and Roll. So, Greg, you're sharing some fascinating stuff that John Lennon called in. I mean, I had heard that he was watching Christian TV, kind of hanging out in the Dakota during this strange period in the 70s, kind of raising his son there, just like being a house husband and watching Christian TV, and that he called up Billy Graham's, called up the number on the screen and professed faith in Christ, and then you said wrote about it in his diary.
Yeah, wrote about his newfound faith in his diary, and he recorded 2 Christian songs. If you go to YouTube and Google John Lennon, Christian songs, you'll find them. They were rough songs. One almost made it on his final album, Double Fantasy. But even in Double Fantasy, you can see him beginning to soften. He writes in his song Beautiful Boy about his son Sean, before you go to sleep, say a little prayer every day in every way. It gets better and better. John was changing. Now, here's the tragedy, and we all know that John was murdered by Mark David Chapman. And so I begin this book with this statement. There'll be 3 surprises when we get to heaven. Number 1, some of the people we thought would be there won't be there. Number 2, some of the people we never thought would be there will be there. Number 3, we will be there. So here's my premise on John Lennon, because I wasn't there at that moment. He did survive the shooting. They put him in the back of a police car and rushed him to the hospital. The officer asked him, "Do you know who you are?" John did. If in the final moments of his life, John called out to the Jesus he professed faith in, his prayer would have been heard just as surely as Jesus heard the prayer of the thief on the cross. So I can't say with any certainty that John is in heaven, but I'll tell you what, if one is a believer, even if they have a lapse of faith, if they call out to the Lord, he will forgive them. So maybe we'll be surprised and see John in heaven. I don't know.
Well, it's amazing, really, to think that he did make a profession of faith. And I know the story I heard is that Yoko really didn't like it and tried to push him away from it. I never liked Yoko, by the way. I just want to go on the record. Don't like Yoko. She broke up the Beatles. But honestly, it's so fascinating to think of these figures. Now, I know you never met John Lennon. Did you ever meet Bob Dylan?
No, I did not meet Bob Dylan. I met George Harrison once, talked to him for a few minutes. No, never met Dylan. Some of these people I've met that are in my book.
Yeah.
Dion DiMucci, who's a New York boy from Dion and the Belmonts. I've gotten to know him very well. I have a chapter on him. His is a fascinating story because he was supposed to be in that plane with the Big Bopper and Richie Valens.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
God spared Dion's life, and you know, I've gotten to know some of these other guys, and the others I just did research on them because, you know, I've always been interested in pop culture like you are, Eric. We can have stream of consciousness conversations that only the two of us really understand, and so it was an easy book for me to write because I already had a certain knowledge of it, but I did a deep dive into these stories before I wrote them down because I want to make sure what I'm saying is as accurate as it possibly can be. And I don't want to give false hope. But here's the premise of this book, Lennon, Dylan, Alice, and Jesus. It is simply this. No one is beyond the reach of God. Think of someone you know. God can still reach them. If God can reach an Alice Cooper, he can certainly reach your non-believing husband or your prodigal son or your daughter. Really, when you get down to it, Alice, being a pastor's son, was actually just a prodigal who returned to the Lord. He's just a modern version of the prodigal son. And, you know, and you'd think these people wouldn't be open to the gospel, but I think when someone has experienced almost everything the world has to offer, I think when you've been there and you've done that, you've bought the T-shirt, and in some cases you've been the T-shirt, you get to the top and you realize that nothing is there. These people are really searching.
Well, it's funny you say that because very recently we had a Socrates in the City event here in Manhattan with Apollo 16 astronaut Charlie Duke. And he tells that story of, once you've walked on the moon, now what? The whole world is going to be goggling at you for the rest of your life like you're a living god or something, and you can do anything. You can go anywhere, and you're a celebrity. Every company would want you to be on their board or to endorse. And his life was empty. It was just dramatically empty. And he found Jesus, and he tells that story. Well, actually, we will play that on this radio program. The video is up at SocratesInTheCity.com. But it's so interesting because most of us think, boy, if only I could have, what Alice Cooper has or what that astronaut has. If only I could achieve that thing. But it is those who've achieved those things that are in a position to know that it doesn't fulfill you. But I guess many of us, we just find that hard to believe until we achieve those things. But we shouldn't find it hard to believe because those people themselves tell us.
Well, I have a chapter on the framers of rock and roll, the founding fathers, if you will. Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins. And interesting, they're all Southern boys. They all came from poverty. They all came from strong gospel roots. Carl Perkins, who wrote Blue Suede Shoes, actually was an alcoholic who came to Christ when touring with Johnny Cash and spoke openly about his faith in Jesus. I'm working on a documentary film right now that's going to come out in October called Johnny Cash, A Redemption of an American Icon, that's based on my book by the same title. And we've had some rather well-known country music people like Tim McGraw, Sheryl Crow, Winona Judd, and members of the Cash family participate in this film. And, Johnny had it all, and Johnny believed, but he was just, he too was a prodigal son who really returned to his spiritual roots toward the end of his life. And I think of Elvis Presley. Have you seen this new Elvis movie, Eric?
I have not, but I heard it's good.
It's actually pretty good. And I think it's a pretty honest treatment of the life of Elvis, showing his roots in black music, how he was at tent revivals, which is all true. And, Elvis often turned to gospel music for comfort and solace. And there's a story told of when Elvis was performing in concert, and of course he was called the king of rock and roll, and some woman came up with a pillow with a crown on it to present to the king, and Elvis stopped her and said, "Man, there's only one king, and his name is Jesus Christ." So, I can't unequivocally say Elvis was a Christian, but I think he believed. I think he knew where to turn in times of trouble, but of course his life is a tragic cautionary tale of what not to do. It's interesting to contrast Cash and Elvis because they both started out at the same time there at Sun Studios. Both became global superstars. Both became addicted to amphetamines and barbiturates. And then Elvis just went down the tubes and died at 42, and he looked 20 years older, if not more. And Johnny made it to 70, but Johnny had a resurgence at the end of his career, both spiritually and musically. So it's interesting how Johnny ended and just see how these two paths crossed and then went the other directions. It comes down to choices we make. We make our choices, then our choices make us.
Well, it is amazing how, we live, you and I have talked about this, we live in such a secular culture that, apart from people like you or me talking about this, you kind of would just assume that, these people would not be serious Christians. And then when you discover it, you think, wow, how come I haven't heard more? The film Walk the Line, which is in some ways a great film, does not deal with the central issue of Johnny Cash's life. What got him off of drugs and alcohol? Jesus. There's no way around it. And the film avoids that, which is kind of crazy, but typical of Hollywood, it seems to me.
Yes. Well, speaking of Hollywood, we've just finished working on a feature film with the Irwin brothers. That's a story of my life and how I met my wife in the Jesus movement. It's called Jesus Revolution, and it's going to come out in February of next year. And it's being backed by Lionsgate, which is a major Hollywood film studio. And I'm amazed that Lionsgate would back a film called Jesus Revolution. So, God is at work. And like, Eric, what I appreciate about you is you let your light shine, like doing Socrates in the City, the books you write, what you do. You have a desire to go out into the culture and speak up for your faith. And a lot of Christians are too busy retreating when we should be invading. We should be permeating. We should be influencing. So I'm very interested as an evangelist in finding ways through writing books like this or working on films and, of course, preaching and all those things that I do along those lines of trying to bring the gospel to unexpected people in unexpected places.
Well, we're going to go to a break. We'll be right back. We're talking to my friend, Pastor Greg Laurie. The book is Lennon, Dylan, Alice, and Jesus.